love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my own.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Into thy hands I commend my spirit.
We continue in our Lent reflections, looking at the 7 sayings of Jesus on the cross. Last week, we heard Jesus' words, "I thirst," that somehow Jesus, in his full humanity, thirsted, both physically and spiritually. This week, we're reflecting on 2 more of Jesus' sayings on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. In some ways, it sounds familiar. A false accusation, a false trial, an unjust justice system, the court of public opinion that sometimes succeeds in achieving a real conviction. We know stories of injustice. We see them around us. We read about them in the news. We hear about them on the radio. We see them on TV. And when we see and hear those stories of injustice, especially if we know the people involved or we feel like we know them, our hearts cry out for justice. And if we're honest, our hearts often cry out for vengeance too. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, is not something that falls easily from our lips in the face of injustice. So how could Jesus say that? How could he say that they didn't know what they were doing? That the people in the crowd calling for his death, that the people in authority who went along with it didn't know what they were doing. As they made sure that he faced a trial on trumped-up charges, that Pilate didn't know what he was doing when finding no basis for a charge against Jesus and finding that he'd done nothing to deserve death, still punished him, and then even worse, went along with the demands of the crowd to have him put to death, to have him crucified. They knew what they were doing, didn't they? It doesn't come easily to us to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they're not easy or cheap words for Jesus either. But maybe they are that simple and painful recognition that the people who worked hard to see him put up there on the cross, maybe they really didn't know the full implications of what they were doing. And maybe that, at least, is something that's familiar to us. Sometimes, especially when we're so convinced that we're in the right, we don't always see the full implications of what we're doing. We don't see the full implications of our actions or the actions of others. We can't always tell where the full impact will land. And so maybe, as surprising as Jesus' words on the cross are, maybe there's also a sense of relief for us that there is the hope of forgiveness for people who think that they're so right, even as they're getting it so wrong. That Jesus is able to say to them, to say of them, and to say of us, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I wonder too if there's something in Jesus' next words on the cross, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. There's something about that enabled Jesus to say those surprising words that we've just heard. Even as the crowds turned against him and the authorities failed to uphold justice, Jesus trusted deeply in the Father's presence. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Even in that place of very real physical and spiritual thirst, Jesus knew to whom he could entrust himself. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. There's a sense of hope in that for us too, that in our lives, even in the utmost depths, even in the most painful of places, and in the utter weariness of spirit, God's presence, the Father's presence, still finds us. And we too find that we can entrust ourselves to him and find renewal and strength in God's loving presence. Forgiveness can be shocking, can seem to defy our comprehension. And our cry for justice is a valid one. Even when forgiveness occurs, there can still be justice. But if any of us had been there, right there on that day, amongst the crowd, if we'd been there and had tried to guess what might be amongst Jesus' last words, I don't think any of us would have guessed correctly. I don't think I'd have guessed correctly, especially if I'd been amongst those calling for his death. And even if I'd been amongst his disciples, his confused, heartbroken disciples on that day, I don't think I'd have guessed correctly then either. Even having seen Jesus and everything that he'd said and done that indicated that actually he was the kind of person who could say and do things that were surprising, I think his words on the cross would have surprised then as they continue to surprise me now. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Maybe it's in that awareness of God's presence, in that awareness of the Father's love, that the surprising becomes possible, that forgiveness can speak louder than vengeance, that deep trust in God can emerge even from the most painful of places. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit.
When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and pour contempt on all my pride. Forbidding, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my Lord. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did such love and sorrow meet, all thoughts compose so rich a crown? Were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an all small, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my own. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life.